Hello audience, I'm bringing you the first episode of a series that we're going to call Law Rants. This is Tricky speaking. To go ahead and answer your first question, what's a law rant? We're going to be discussing premeditated topics in the series through either PowerPoints or some kind of backdrop that's not a game, to entertain you in different ways. We do take suggestions on topics, and if you want to give your feedback or opinions on a current law rant or one in the future, then you can email us at feedback.loltalk@gmail.com. So today's topic is going to be preservation of the narrative. And I know what you're thinking. Well, what? Let me give you some background before I go into the topic so that you know kind of what makes me choose this topic as my first discussion. There's a lot of things about the video game industry today that I am not satisfied with. The primary of which is the strain that companies have gone through right now, which is they only want graphical superiority in their games, it seems. The example that I'm going to be using to prove this point is Crysis. Crysis is a good game. Let me start by saying that. I don't want to step on any Crysis fans. But it's got good gameplay and amazing graphics. But as much as that helps it, it's still not as well received as, say, your Call of Duty titles. Now, the counterexample, or not counterexample to my point, but the counter to Crysis is Grand Theft Auto 5, which has acceptable graphics because while it does look amazing, the game does have some parts that are poorly rendered intentionally to increase the running speed and the quality of the game. And it's probably going to win Game of the Year in spite of its Crysis level graphics. The second one is the stress on the story that companies are putting on today. My example for this is going to be Beyond Two Souls, because the director of Beyond Two Souls has recently said he wants a more mature gamer that wants more out of their movies. It went to a film festival, it's one of, and don't get me wrong, it is a good game again, but it's driven entirely based on its story with nothing else to kind of back it up. And while the gameplay is good for a couple of playthroughs, it's more like you're playing a movie than you are a game. The counter to that is Dark Souls. Dark Souls doesn't have much in the ways of a story element during the game, but its gameplay is so solid that it immerses you in the world and you want to learn more about what you're doing. And that's how the story exposition goes in Dark Souls. The third reason that I'm dissatisfied with the industry is money, money, money. To buy a new game in my state, it costs $64.19. That means if I want to get a new 12-hour game, I am paying over $5 per hour of the game that I get, which I do not like as a gamer on a budget. So now that you know what makes me dissatisfied with the industry, I'm going to tell you what exactly preserving the narrative means to me. It's a term that I kind of coined among my friends, and basically what I'm saying is a narrative, I'm referring to the story of a game from start to finish. And preservation of the narrative is trying to keep a story pure after the first time playing through it. So it's a lot like when you read a book, and the first time through the book, it's a really good story, it wraps you up, it keeps you captivated, and you'll never get back that feeling of wanting to know what's next, because no matter how hard you try, every other time you read the book, you will be reminded of what is going to happen next, and you don't get that foreshadowing, the build of the epic climax and the resolution of the story that you're just waiting so much for. You're never going to be able to get that feeling back. So books obviously don't make an effort to preserve the narrative, but they can't really do much with it because if you read through a book once and you read through it again, it's the same text. So what makes a book really good is different from what makes a video game really good. To discuss preservation of the narrative, I'm going to be using two examples. My two examples that I've chosen are a good one and a bad one. My good example is Uncharted 2. We'll come back to that in a minute. My bad example of preservation of the narrative is Batman Arkham City. First of all, I'm going to talk about what's good about Batman Arkham City because it is a good game. I mean, it won Game of the Year, and I can't really step on it in terms of its gameplay. Its story is good on the first playthrough. I'm not going to spoil anything on this one because if you haven't played through yet, it is worth a playthrough, especially now that it's gone through some price drops. It's got solid gameplay. The combat system is immersive. You get to play as Batman, who's a familiar hero. It's in a good setting because they chose to, expand on the Arkham Asylum formula by giving you a more sandbox and open environment where you can glide around as Batman. If you're good enough at gliding, you can fly. I mean, how awesome is that? And then there's the challenge maps, and the challenge maps were a neat way to extend gameplay ability without really adding in any asinine exploration sections that you didn't really want. If you wanted to skip straight to the action, you pick a challenge map, you do your Predator mission or your combat, and you just have fun beating up people as your favorite DC hero. Now what it did wrong is it was a short story that you can beat in one sitting if you really wanted to, and anybody that refutes that, I have a friend that did it personally, so I'll give you his email and you can talk to him about it. There's a couple other minor complaints that I have, but the biggest blaring issue with Batman Arkham City is the preservation of the narrative. Now, to set up what I mean by this, when you play through the first story of Batman, it's awesome. And then you get to the challenge maps, and if you got the DLC or if you got the Game of the Year edition, you'll notice that these characters in the game, with the exception of Deathstroke, who's going to be in Arkham Origins. I'll come back to him in a little bit. Nightwing, Red Robin, they're already in the game in the challenge maps. They're just reskins and different combat styles on Batman and everything, but they're in the game. So here's my question. Why not let me play through the story again as a different character? I mean, you've got these to pick from, with Deathstroke being the example that I'm going to use in the future installment of Arkham Origins, which they're still not going to do. You're not going to be able to play through the game as Deathstroke after you've beaten it once, no matter how awesome it may be. A lot of people say, if they did an alternate character, then they wouldn't be able to come up with a good way for them to go around the city. But I mean, they did Catwoman in her little freaking whip onto the building, climb up the building by a series of rhythmic leaps. Got really old after the first 3 times I was doing it. So you can't really make the whole, only Batman can have seamless transition through the environment that they set up, because Catwoman didn't, and everybody still played her. Now, not only do they have these characters that are in the Batman universe, this is a DC Comics game, so you also have a couple other people that would be cool to throw into this environment, like Green Lantern, Green Arrow, Cyborg, and a few others. But that's not the point. You beat the story once in Batman, and yay, you did it. You resolved the story that I'm not going to spoil, and what do you get? New Game Plus. Awesome idea, right? In many RPGs, this is a foundation of what makes a game, what makes an RPG replayable, because you get to restart with all the power that you spent all that time acquiring. But what does it mean in Batman? It's boring, because you're still Batman, you still have the same gadgets, it's still the same combat style with the same combat system, and it's still the same story. So, and there is Catwoman. I can't discount her. She was in the game. But her story just simply served to supplement Batman's story. So what could they have done? They could have just let you play through as a different skin on Batman using either Nightwing, Red Robin, any of all the heroes that I mentioned just off the top of my head in that earlier slide. And it would have been cool, because it would have been a fresh new character in an environment, and all it requires is just a little bit of forgetting about the integrity of the narrative. Because if I've played through the story as Batman, I already know what happens with Batman in the story. So playing through it again just to go through those situations as a different hero is appealing, because then I'm not playing the same story as Batman, I'm playing the same story as a different hero, and seeing how they would have handled the situation, or how they could have handled the situation if you put somebody that could fly, or somebody that had different gadgets, or somebody like Cyborg who's got an awesome gigantic beam cannon on his arm. There's tons of stuff that you could have done by just simply adding in a new character through DLC or just unlocks like the old days. So, awesome segue into Uncharted 2. Uncharted 2 is my example whenever I talk about this with my buddies. If I want to talk about preservation of the narrative and how much I don't like it, I use Uncharted as my example of how good it is when a game doesn't preserve the narrative. Uncharted 2 is an awesome third-person shooter where I get to run through the game as Nolan North, essentially, or a descendant of Sir Francis Drake, Nathan Drake. And I run through, I shoot up some enemies to fight a blue guy in a tropical shiny blue pool place where he goes crazy and gets mad at me, which is awesome. After I beat that game, I get to go through it again as Drake with boobs, or maybe Fat Drake, or the skeleton of Sir Francis Drake, or I can give everybody I want to rocket launchers and blow everything up as much as I want. How awesome is that? Because I get to be frustrated my entire time through the game the first time, and then when I replay it, I get to give myself whatever weapon I want or a reskin to keep the game interesting and fresh. And that is what it does. It keeps the game fresh and gives the game replay value without the need for trophies. And trophies are not a legitimate source of replay value, because there are a good portion of gamers that just don't care what their achievement score or what their trophy level is. So game companies that try and stress replay value through trophies that encourage you to go on to harder difficulties can't really make that a big selling point of the game, because if a game is hard to platinum or if a game is hard to complete, then a lot of gamers will just give up and trade it in, because they know that that's a goal that they may never achieve. But if you give somebody a reward for beating the game simply by just playing through it, like Uncharted does, where they give you money for all your challenges that you complete, and they let you unlock guns and character skins with it. It gives the gamer a reason to play through, just to see the hilarity of playing through Uncharted as Chloe and seeing Chloe interact with Chloe, or playing through as Big Fat Drake, who somehow still has all the agility that regular Skinny Drake does, or playing through the game as the bad guy. You can do that too. All of that stuff is completely breaking the narrative down, because you're not playing as the main titular hero of the game. But it still makes the game good because it adds humor to what was already an awesome story. So that's my example of what preservation of narrative does to a game, and what a game can be without it. So I hope you enjoyed this presentation, and as always, you can feel free to comment, follow us on Twitter at @loltalk channel, and email me at the address seen earlier in the presentation for feedback, comments, concerns, opinions, suggestions on what I should talk about next, or if you just like my doodles. This is Tricky, signing off.